Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe if you feel so inclined. This is going to be a little video, kind of actually for potential new dungeon masters, people who are experienced dungeon masters, might pick something up out of some of the things I have to say. But I'm talking with a new DM, someone who's just started or someone who's thinking about jumping into it, and by dungeon master I'm kind of using it as a generic term. Game master, storyteller, all those different, lore keeper, depending on what game system and setting you're using, might give you a different, title to give yourself. But dungeon master is the generic. It's the band-aid of the thing, so I'm just gonna go with that. And probably also frame it a lot through D&D, because let's face it, it's the most popular, most introductory game out there. So if you're a new DM, odds are high that Dungeons & Dragons is going to be the first thing you run. If not, good for you. But, there's a couple of real just basic things that you need to be able to have the beginnings of mastery of. You don't have to be perfect overnight. There's a learning curve. You're not ever going to really get really great at something until you've done it a lot. From my own end, I'm a better adventure designer and setting designer than I am necessarily an in-person game master, because I tend to, only run one-shot adventures that last a few sessions, and has been rather large gaps over the course of my adult life in between running those, but I spend a lot of time crafting and working out all the variables and such, so that when they are in play, everything runs really super smoothly. People have a good time. They feel like they're invested in what's going on, and everything feels real to them. And if that's the sort of thing that you're trying to accomplish with this, there's a few things you need to keep in mind. In terms of what a game master or dungeon master is, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. In the end, I would advise, of course I'm going to advise doing what I do, but try to develop, your own voice. Don't listen too much to what other dungeon masters or even the books have to say about what it is to be a dungeon master. This is, even if you're not actually being a novelist or a director in those kinds of terms, there's aspects of being a creative writer that comes along with being a dungeon master, even if you're using pre-published settings and scenarios. And so, it's good to kind of start to develop those sorts of skills, and this is as good of a way as any to kind of give you a reason to start focusing in on that. But as I say, you are not a novelist. If you're trying to write a perfectly crafted plot point by plot point storyline, and you should write a book. There is an element to these games that once they are set in motion, it becomes this big, chaotic zeitgeist, gestalt kind of thing, this shared imaginary environment that's evolving with everyone's input, and because of the way they stagger everyone's ability to declare what the character's doing in terms of initiative orders and stuff like that. You could have a plan in combat, but by the time it circles all the way back around to you, everything has changed. So you kind of have to throw that plan out and come out with a new plan on the fly of exactly what you want your character to do. It's incredibly dynamic, and a real headache at times to keep in your head. But it's unique. It's a unique experience. No other form of entertainment really quite captures that. But you're not a novelist. You have to be able to. You have to know your world. There has to be ongoing stuff in the background that is going to be going forward in the setting, typically involving your villains or your major protagonist type of NPC allies that characters can or cannot interact with. But unlike an Elder Scrolls game where you're playing through Skyrim, and you're going through the Dragonborn storyline, but you decide to stop and go do something else for a little while, because you can go back and pick up exactly where you left off, and that whole timeline is just kind of just sitting there waiting for you. Well, when you're running a tabletop game, don't do it like that. If you decide to wander off, from fulfilling the legacy of the Dragonborn to destroy Alduin and all that kind of stuff for a while, then the events of that storyline should be continuing without you while you're off, futzing around and, rifting or whatever. That's, you need to, like I said, there's writing elements to it, but you can't predict the plot points very far ahead of yourself once it's actually in motion. You should put most of your focus and attention on writing your introductory scenario, being very familiar with the starting zone of play in terms of what's all there, how the environment works, how the various sentient and non-sentient life forms that are to be found in the environment, regardless of what kind of genre you're running, like how are they likely to react, what are their motivations, what's their day-to-day gist. It doesn't have to be a perfect photorealistic snapshot of things, but the more you feel that the world that you're creating for your players is real, the more they will feel it's real, because they'll subconsciously pick off of from you that you feel confident, and how the Goblin King is going to react to their proposal and all that kind of stuff. But to also another degree, like, you can't take that too far, because you have to juggle a lot of stuff in your head, because once it's in motion, it's going to constantly change on you. Generally, I'm in the camp of, after you have your original starting adventure scenario going, try as best as you can to like plant seeds for further things to have happen at later levels down the line if your campaign can last that long. But for the most part, you're just going to be writing for the next session. You finish one session, write a bunch of material for the next session, try to write more material than you need, because after a while you'll compile a bunch of extra stuff that you haven't gotten to use, and then you can kind of refigure that to use in a session every once in a while if you want to take a week off without having to think about these things. There's a lot of work that comes with doing this. That's just a given fact. It's a money sink and a time sink for yourself, and part of one of the things that is nice about D&D, in spite of its genericness, is it's real easy to run because they have everything already statted out for you, and they have all these established settings and tons of adventures that you can mix and match as you want, or just pull things from. It kind of gives you a lot of material. I do a lot of videos about Rifts, obviously, and that game is the other end of that spectrum. That takes even more preparation time to be able to run, a Rifts game or any other kind of Palladium game, unless you just entirely learn to fudge it on the fly and just not let on to your players that you don't actually have stats for most of the stuff they're interacting with. Which, even though it shouldn't matter, players generally don't like finding that kind of stuff out, because then they feel like things are being unfair to them. You need to be careful not to, speaking of being unfair to your players, you need to, really try to develop a impartial judgment to be able to, resolve scenarios and questions that arise in the game in terms of how things are going to interact and react to what players are doing with their characters. They, as long as they feel that you're being fair and you're not giving your NPCs an overt advantage, or you're not favoring one player over the other, they'll be more forgiving and less uptight if something goes against their character's favor because of a decision you have to make on the fly. That's also helpful for being able to design better NPCs that have motivations that seem more real, even though the player characters are not likely to ever actually learn whatever intricate backstory you've come up with for the centuries of history behind this evil lich that's escaping the tomb and terrorizing the countryside, or whatever the scenario you're running is with. Once again, the more you feel that it's real and you feel that you understand the NPC and how it's going to, feel about things that happen to it, the more your players will pick up from you the sense of that reality, that that's a fully fleshed three-dimensional being, even though it's completely just a figment of this shared imagination that's going on. So, I guess, how would you break that? Well, the four basic functional things you need to do, or need to be able to know, is you need just a touch of acting ability. You don't have to perfectly portray every character and do voices for everything. You don't even have to constantly come up with dialogue on the fly. It's perfectly acceptable to just describe what an NPC is telling the players. At times, I do feel everyone in general has kind of gotten it's too commonplace where the entire player character group is trying to talk in character the entire time, which creates some awkward, weird dialogue, because not everyone's necessarily super skilled at coming up with the best prose, on 5-second notice and all that kind of stuff. Or, your character needs to make a speech to convince the king to do the thing, but, you're a 17-year-old kid and you're not necessarily, really going to come up with the best Jean-Luc Picard soliloquy about, whatever the given topic is. But instead you could make a dice roll and just describe the gist of what your character is saying. In many ways, players are... You need to remember that your players are both participants. They are playing the game. They're playing along. They are participating. But they are also the audience. And to a degree, being a dungeon master is being a showman. I feel it's much more closer to being a carnival barker or a circus ringleader in many ways than it is to being like the referee of a football game or a basketball game or anything like that. In terms of like, yes, there is the rules arbitration, but the rules are, that's like a whole other subject in and of itself. But you need a little bit of acting ability so you can help portray the NPCs to people. You need just enough creative writing to be able to describe a scenario to people. You need just enough improv ability to be able to resolve that scenario based on what the players have chosen to do with it. Because that's really the whole point of what's going on in these games, is you're describing a scenario that's got some sort of problem of some sort. That could be combat related, that could be a mystery, it could be a conundrum, it could be some sort of goal they have to achieve through all sorts of manners of ways. In either case, there's some sort of problem that they have to solve, and that you have to be able to describe that scene/scenario well enough that they can feel confident about making any kinds of decisions. You don't give them enough of a description of what's going on, then they're just going to do the one thing that you present to them. If they need to know what the environment is in order to be able to know that there's ways they can get around the goblin without just hacking it to bits and then alienating the Goblin King later on, kind of stuff. There's a whole slew of things that are like, if you want to be a good game master down the line, I mean, obviously, no one's going to be able to like instantly pop in with perfect encyclopedic knowledge about like all these sorts of subjects. But there's a lot of social sciences and hard sciences that are really handy to have at least some basic, understanding of, to once again be able to create a world environment that you feel is real, and therefore your players will feel is real. The social sciences, to some degree, maybe a bit more than the hard sciences. It kind of depends on what kind of game you're aiming here for. But, as regrettable as it is to have to bring up, you might have to know a little bit about political science if you want the kingdoms and nations and star empires of your role-playing game setting to seem at all like they're actually, like making decisions for the sorts of reasoning, geopolitical or interstellar political kinds of reasoning that actually dictates how politics moves in the real world. You'll want to understand history, not just to kind of be able to better establish a proper sense of continuity as if there has been ongoing forward motion in your setting, but also history is just absolutely chock full of little incidents and stories that your players might not know about at all, and so therefore you can pluck and mix and match and change a few names and all that kind of stuff. To be able to create something that your players are perceiving as some original plot twist, and because you're pulling from something that's not the common pop culture that everyone at your table shares in. Like we already understand plot twists out of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Harry Potter and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. People will recognize when you're trying to pull a Hydra, in the setting with whatever faction they belong to, and it turns out there's a secret sub-faction within that faction. Ha ha ha. Like they'll know what you're doing if you do that. But they might not understand if you're like pulling a bunch of weird analogies about like the early Republic years of Rome and how they absorbed the surrounding tribes of Italy and all that kind of stuff. That might flow. Some of your players certainly, certain personality types have certain kinds of interests and shared interests that all drag us all here to there. So it's not like your players are not going to have any grasp of history themselves. But it's a good resource for you as a dungeon master in particular to read up more about history, and not just local, or recent history, but like as much history as you can come across. You'll never know when you'll be inspired by something that you can use. And also, as I say, to help to start to see what those large patterns of reaction and counter-reaction on a global level are like, so that you can replicate that to create a sense of continuity within your setting whenever you're having to reference the background world that all this stuff has emerged from. To the kind of similar degree, sociology and psychology are both handy to know a little bit about, especially since to a degree of psychology in particular with your players, you know, there is a bit of like, you know, stage magicianness about all this. You know, you're being a bit of an illusion weaver and knowing, you know, how to, you know, like create sympathies that for characters and NPCs that the players actually can believe in, helps tie them more, invest them more, you know, into what's going on, and makes them more likely to keep showing up to continue the game, so that you have more of a, you know, a better chance of actually having a campaign actually last long enough to even qualify as a campaign, and not 75% of an adventure module before everyone parts ways. Geography and cartography, and you know, are also like, geography is kind of a little bit of both a soft and a hard science. Cartography, you want to familiarize yourself with maps and how maps work. That's kind of the basis to lead into then the geography and geology kind of things that you would also help in your understanding of how the environment that the characters are adventuring in operates. But cartography is like your stepping stone into that. So many role-playing games are dependent upon maps, and so like knowing how maps are designed, and you know, the purpose of borders, all that kind of stuff, how borders are typically decided in treaties, and how various kind of land regions kind of dictate the shape of things, and where the choke points are in terms of commerce travel, kind of dictates where cities are most likely to pop up. It's good to have an understanding of all these things. And as I say, through cartography, you then get into like the actual understanding of like how the geology works, you know, what's been like the ancient cycle of tectonic events that have shaped the land, so that you have mountains here and flatlands here. Branching off from that into meteorology and oceanography, knowing your planet, where your planet's seas are, even if the adventuring environment is like thousands of miles away from those seas, knowing how the oceans are distributed and what kind of air currents there are, and where those air currents carry moisture to, you know, over mountain ranges and all that kind of stuff, you know, especially if you're doing a homebrew setting, you know, will help you, you know, have a more realistic in your own head a depiction of where your deserts and forests and tropical zones and all that kind of stuff is. The more you can feel that your environment that you're creating is real, the more your players will feel it's real. I know I've said that a few times because it needs reinforcement. Knowledge of physics, if you're doing science fiction, or even just, you know, general, like being able to describe the mechanics so your players understand why there's limits on range, or throwing things, or dropping stuff on people, velocities. The entirety of physics is handy to have a grasp of, even if you don't necessarily need to be doing a bunch of like, you know, high-end algebra to figure things out, because the way the game rules kind of simplify things so that it's, you know, doesn't drag things down too much in play at the table. You want to keep the forward momentum going while you're playing. And, you know, there's other little odds and ends here. Biology is good. Actually having some understanding of medicine and how the human body works. Understanding botany, zoology, just a whole slew of sciences are things that you're going to need to develop some sort of interest in if you really want to, like, have good, memorable, unique, you know, role-playing game sessions. Your primary job is you're a showman. You're putting on a show. You are the game being made manifest. You are the most critical component in this entire operation. You know, the people can write role-playing games all they want, and people might buy them and read them and put them on their shelves, and people might want to play them all they want, but without the person who actually puts the game in operation and manages it, none of the whole thing is just, you know, so much, you know, mental masturbation. Like I said, you just gotta, like, don't get too egotistical about like how creative you're being. You go in knowing that this is an act of improvisation, and that it's going to be hard to predict too far down the line. Plant seeds in terms of the kinds of rumors and background information characters are given, so that they are aware that there might be darker, more dangerous things out there in the setting. Give them several choices and just kind of see what they bounce to on their own once they've resolved whatever the initial situation is. I always recommend trying to give the player characters as focused of a reason to be together and some sort of basic quick to resolve mission, at least at the very beginning of the game when they first start out. Just so you have less wishy-washiness of trying to like figure out why these people are together and would even like each other, and why would they talk to the ranger that's sitting at the bar looking at them all mysteriously. You know, if you already start them off where they're employed by that ranger and on the way to go do the thing, and then you can start bringing in like the random caveats and come up with whatever your first encounter is. I know some people like really like the hard opens, some people like the cold opens. You know, especially once the game is ongoing, like how you open any individual given session, it shouldn't always do the exact same thing at the same time. And so far as that this is an ongoing act of entertainment, you should try to work similar themes into the structure of each individual session in this kind of same way that, you know, TV shows and movies kind of have a, you know, like every episode kind of has like its basic kind of rhythms that it goes through in order to be able to let you know about, you know, the, you know, adventures of Ray Romano and his suburban family, or whatever the TV show in question you're trying to recreate in your role-playing game is. I myself, you know, just can't help but, you know, observe that everyone loves Raymond, so, you know, why not model my games on that? Anyway, so get out there, go do it. Like I said, you know, like, yeah, you'll want to read, you know, the DM sections in the role-playing games, but don't let that override your own instincts. Try to find your own voice. Take everything you hear from other DMs with a grain of salt. It might work for them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it works for you or that you should have to do it. And all that good stuff. In fact, for that matter, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm just some guy. And on that note, hit like and subscribe. Leave some comments. And until next time, stay waspinated.